Um, Welcome, everybody. I'm Matt Rizzo, and I have the pleasure of helping to lead the American Brain Coalition with a lot of really smart people on the ABC Board of Directors. So on behalf of the Board of Directors, welcome ABC members, welcome guests. This is our 2022 annual membership meeting. It's packed. It's exciting. We have a lot. We have two special guests. So without further ado, let's move along. The first thing I'd like to do is to introduce our newest board members. And those are, and I hope they're on, Chantel Ferland Beckham. Dr. Beckham is the Senior Director of External Affairs of Cone Veterans Bioscience. And then also would like to welcome Dr. Mar Sanchez, and she's a Division Chief and Core Scientist of Developmental and Cognitive Neuroscience at the Emory National Primate Research Center, very renowned. I would love to name and welcome and introduce every board member and have them say a few words, but like I said, our agenda is just packed. They're a very important part of the ABC. You can see their photos on this slide. Katie and I are very grateful for all they do, all their great advice, all their ears to the ground information. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Mark Raisnick here. He's the vice chair of us. And Mark, take it away. Mark, you're on mute. You're the first one.
All right. Sorry. I wanted to introduce the new ABC members. And if there are representatives from these organizations here, we'd love for you to put something in the chat introducing yourself. Our nonprofit members are the Epilepsy Alliance America, Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium, Neurotech Network, and Simply Neuroscience. Our new corporate members are Alto Neuroscience, Harmony Biosciences, Karuna Therapeutics, and Synapse Diagnostic Biomarker Technology. So there's more information on all of these on our website, and please go to it if you want to know more. Bobby.
Because we are virtual, Dr. Rizzo has called for a motion to approve the 2021 annual membership meeting minutes, which were included in your meeting agenda packet. And Dr. Raisnick has seconded. Any changes, additions, oppositions to the minutes, please indicate in the chat box. Otherwise, minutes will be approved at the end of the meeting. Thank you. Diana?
All right. Hi, everyone. The American Brain Coalition continues to keep a very modest operating budget. This year's total budget is over $350,000, which means we do quite a bit with little resources. Membership dues remain the largest portion of our income, with nonprofit dues making up over half of our income. We also receive a modest amount of income from a few sponsorships helping with our educational programming. A more detailed end of the year financial report will be included in the ABC's annual report, which will be distributed at the end of 2022, early 2023. On behalf of the ABC board, we thank you for all your contributions. Without your dues, we could not operate. Thank you. Pass it on to Craig.
Greetings. Hi, I'm Craig Obie. I'm the Advocacy Committee Vice Chair. A Washington update was circulated as a written report with the agenda. I'm only going to briefly summarize the highlights from that report. So if you have questions, please let us know. If you have questions about the report, and of course, we'll do our best to keep you updated on appropriations as we learn more. In terms of policy priorities, the ABC Advocacy Committee has developed a set of public policy priorities to direct our advocacy work. We regularly review and update those priorities, and they include, at this point, chronic care, ethical use of animals in research, federal investment in brain research, innovative approaches for developing new CNS cures, mental health and substance use insurance parity, and stem cell research. The ABC has circulated a number of statements and letters this past year, led either by the ABC itself or by your organizations, all of which support ABC's policy priorities. Our letters, statements, and priority white papers can be found on the ABC website, so I encourage you to take a look there. In terms of the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus, we continue to work with the caucus in hosting and organizing briefings on a number of topics to engage Congress and congressional staff about the brain. We held a series of virtual briefings this year, including sessions on the importance of brain donation, long-haul neurological and psychological impacts of COVID, the importance of neuroethics, the potential for the use of psychedelics in the treatment of some psychiatric diseases, and the importance of brain funding. We have been discussing with the caucus some exciting briefing ideas for 2023, and we are very much hoping that we'll be able to do some of that in person this coming year. So stay tuned for that as well. And back to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Craig. Appreciate that update. There's obviously a lot going on, and that was an abbreviated report, but a great summary. So I'd like to move on now to talk a little bit about innovations and understanding of brain structure and function. And for that, we're very lucky to have Dr. John Nye. He's the director of the NIH Brain Initiative at the NIH that involves multiple institutes and many other collaborators. I think everybody on the Zoom today will agree that understanding the basic structure and function of the brain are absolutely critical for advancing cures of all these conditions that we represent that are so devastating. I think you may know that about 100 million people in the US have brain disorders, and that comprises perhaps 1,000 different diseases, some of them juggernauts and very familiar to you, others quite rare, and people are unlucky enough to have their family names assigned to them, and they're few, but they do need help. They need treatments and they need cures. In order to get those, we need to understand what the brain is, what the cells are, what the basic circuits are, how they all work together, and then we can have tangible targets for treatments and cures. And I think that's what Dr. Nye and his team are getting at. So the ABC has been a very proud advocate of brain research through advancing innovative neurotechnologies, and that's what BRAIN stands for. The initiative was established in 2013, and we've been honored to help them over the last several years. By the way, I didn't want to give short shrift to psychiatric conditions. There are about 400 of those. We all know how critical issues are with anxiety and depression and substance use disorders, particularly since the pandemic. These are problems that can't be ignored. Anyway, we're very thrilled to have Dr. Nye participating with us today. He has been a very effective director of the NIH Brain Initiative, and I think he's going to update us now on BRAIN's advances over the past year, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions about what this all means and a pathway forward together. So Dr. Nye, please take it away.
Thanks very much, Dr. Rizzo, for that kind introduction, and very special thanks to the American Brain Coalition. The ABC and its partners have been, and its affiliates have been a terrific partner as we seek to accelerate discovery to find new cures. So let's see, are you seeing the correct screen here?
Yes.
Great, terrific, thanks very much. So I just want to give you an update on where we are and to talk about how the BRAIN Initiative is, we believe, is transforming neuroscience by accelerating the pace of discovery and with the ultimate goal of accelerating the search for cures. Now, I'm going to hazard a guess that everyone here has a family member, friend, or loved one, or themselves are suffering from some neurological disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, epilepsy, stroke, or as Dr. Rizzo mentioned, some neuropsychiatric condition like depression, OCD, autism, or substance use disorder. In some cases, these are debilitating disorders. And together, all these diseases, they're exacting a huge toll, both at the personal level as well as on the societal level. And for these individuals, for their families, for ourselves, we really cannot find a cure fast enough. And it's not going to be one cure, it's going to be many, many different cures. So what I hope to convey to you today is that through accelerating the pace of discovery about how the brain works normally and why and how it doesn't work in disease, the resources being developed by the NIH Brain Initiative will help researchers deliver these cures to us sooner rather than later. So let's see, get this thing going here. So I believe most of you here know or somewhat familiar with the Brain Initiative. I won't belabor too much introduction, but just to remind us all, the NIH Brain Initiative, here the goal is to develop and apply new tools for understanding how neural circuits underlie complex behaviors, both in models of health as well as in disease. The Brain Initiative is a trans-NIH initiative. It spans across 10 of the 27 NIH institutes or centers, and it really is uniquely situated for cross-cutting and accelerated discovery in neuroscience that goes beyond the capability of any single NIH institute or center. And we do so by tapping this into synergies across multiple fields to address the personal societal challenges imposed by human brain disorders. And in order for us to achieve this goal of better understanding neural circuits and how to apply this knowledge toward finding cures, it's very important for us to leverage emerging technologies to enable these new discoveries about neural circuit function, to use these discoveries as a foundation for new therapies for human brain disorders. And very importantly, our mission ultimately is to disseminate and democratize these riches for the benefit of all. Now, just give a very quick summary of Brain by the numbers. Since its inception, with the first grants being funded in 2014, NIH has invested over $3 billion in over 1,300 brain projects since that initial period in 2014. And with this generous funding from Congress, Brain has been remarkably productive. And our funding right now comes from two main sources. Base appropriations shown in dark blue that go to these 10 ICs, as well as 21st Century Cures funding, which was authorized back in 2016, 2017, that adds on top of it. And right now, with these investments, over 5,000 articles have been published to date in top journals in the field across diverse scientific disciplines. So we're really hitting a sweet spot in terms of making groundbreaking discoveries that are building new paths toward understanding and ultimately curing these devastating human brain disorders. And I think we have a shot at doing so within our lifetime. Now, I'd like to leave you today with three takeaways, and because of time constraints, I'm going to have to be very brief, but we're happy to take questions afterwards. The first takeaway is that brain-funded advances in tool and technology development are already making their way into the clinic with a big potential to see positive impacts on human health. So still early days, but I think we're starting to see the payoff already. The second takeaway I'd like to leave you with is that brain-funded teams are developing new resources and technologies that are laying down a foundation for future cures. So this is basically we're hoping that it can advance the timeline for getting at the fundamentals of human diseases and therefore finding actual cures and not just treatments. And then finally, we're changing the way we're doing science, all in the service of the above. We are leveraging talent from different backgrounds and across the globe, actually, to tackle these complex problems and deliver resources that, again, will accelerate research across all domains of neuroscience. And again, this spans not just within any one IC mission, but across all of neuroscience. Okay, so let me just take on this first point. I want to give you one example about how brain-funded investigators are taking best-in-class existing technologies and pushing them further to have an impact in the clinic. So this is just a series of figures from a study that was published late last year by Dr. Samir Sheth's group at Baylor College of Medicine. Now, I'm sure most of not all of you are quite familiar with deep brain stimulation. It's been around for decades, used primarily for the treatment of movement disorders, including the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And they're kind of pushing the limits more. And if we look at mood disorders, they are highly complex. And DBS was initially proposed and tried out for mood disorders maybe a decade ago. After some initial successes, it kind of hit some hard times because it was found to be ineffective. And part of that probably is because each individual is different. If we look at any particular mood disorder like depression, it's not one disease or disorder. It's probably going to be very, very specific for different individuals. And if you don't target not only the right part of the anatomy, but actually intervene at the right under the right conditions, the chances of success probably will not be so high. So what folks have done using some very sophisticated reasoning, imaging, as well as computational methods, is they have started tailoring these DBS therapies to the individual patient. So what you can see here in the upper left is Dr. Sheff and his team looking at a holographic display of a particular part of a circuit that they believe is going to be involved in driving this particular patient into a depressive state, and one that was until now completely resistant to treatment. And they use this as a basis for where to place the stimulating and recording electrodes. And then from these recording electrodes, they actually monitor this patient for 9 days, and they correlated activity from these different electrode sites with both objective and subjective measures of the patient's mood. And they were able to design a therapy customized for that patient to provide stimulation to move that patient literally from a poor mood state to a good mood state. And it actually pushed this patient into remission from that patient's symptoms after some number of weeks. And there's a complementary studies being performed by other groups around the country, including at UCSF. And this is really, really quite promising, these so-called personalized DBS therapies, adaptive or closed therapies, that literally was the stuff of science fiction maybe 5 or 8 years ago, and now is coming into reality. And currently we are supporting larger clinical trials to see how much more broadly we can apply this and disseminate it and learn not only about how to treat folks with these debilitating diseases, but also learn a bit more about what's driving them. So there'll be a great information to come in the future. So this is just one example of how brain is already starting to show promise in the clinic. And we're very, very hopeful that we can bring some help to folks who otherwise have no hope for any relief. The second thing I'd like to discuss with you just very briefly is that we're laying down a foundation to bring future cures closer to us based on gaining more fundamental knowledge about how neural circuits work. So the basic idea behind this is that in order to understand how the neural circuits in our brains underlie behavior, emotion, cognition, and so forth, we need to have a parts list as well as a wiring diagram for the brain. So we need to know what the circuit looks like, as well as a way to interrogate and modulate these circuits, not only to test hypotheses about how these components interact and how they're wired together, but also ultimately as a foundation for future cures. Now, the big challenge here is one of complexity. So the human brain comprises 86 billion neurons, plus or minus, about twice as many non-neural cells, which altogether form these highly complex circuits and subcircuits. And we need to understand what the parts are and how they communicate with each other to understand what goes wrong in various disease states, including these neurodegenerative diseases that we're also concerned about, neuropsychiatric disorders, as well as things like long COVID, which we believe is going to certainly involve some aspect of neuroinflammation. So again, we need a parts list, we need a wiring diagram, we need a way to harness this information to modulate the circuits with the ultimate goal of intervening in these circuit disorders of the human brain. So brain has started moving very, very intentionally in this area. I'd just like to give you one example of a recent success, a down payment, if you will. And this is coming out of what we call what was just closing out as the Brain Initiative Cell Census Network, where the goal here was to generate a comprehensive parts list of the mammalian brain using very multiple and very sophisticated cutting edge techniques. And this was recently published as a characterization of the primary motor cortex across different mammalian species. It was published in a series of papers in October 2021 issue of Nature, plus another set of papers in Nature sister journals. And it really is a testament to what you can do, what one can do by leveraging large and very highly motivated teams. So we performed an analysis of primary motor cortex in multiple mammalian species at unprecedented depth and breadth, and identified upwards of over 100 different discrete cell types with their characteristics embedded in this information. And this gave us some insights into the organizational principles underlying the diversity of brain cell types. And again, this really showed the power of team science. This is really an example of being able to obtain a resource that can be used as an atlas for everybody in the field. But it really could only have been done with this large consortium. It encompassed over 250 researchers, over 3 continents from over 45 institutions. And so, is this really going to be a foundation for new cures? Well, it turns out, I think, yes. Already, even though this project is still underway and it's just 5 years old, it's already provided the tools and the know-how that have allowed groups to identify the specific brain cell types that are vulnerable either in Alzheimer's disease or in Parkinson's disease in humans, not in a model system, but in humans. And this provides us critical information for ultimately finding prevention and cures. So it's not just that we've identified cells that are vulnerable. We knew that cells were dying, but we now have a molecular handle on these cells, which allows us now to go in and understand more about them, what genes, proteins, molecules they express, and hopefully how these genes and proteins interact that make them either more or less vulnerable in different forms of the disease. So this is very, very powerful information. I am confident that this will have a big impact in helping us understand much more about how these diseases not only progress, but how they're initially initiated. And this sets the stage for the Human Brain Cell Atlas. After all, we are very interested in how the human brain works, and again, the basis for human brain disorders. So to this end, Brain is creating a new way of doing science. I mentioned this as the third point. And based on the success of the cell census project that I just mentioned to you, which is really just kind of a step-up phase, Brain Initiative is now entering into a new phase where it was believed and is decided that this is a great time to invest in a few large projects that really could transform the way that everybody in the field does their work. So the overarching goal of these 3 so-called Brain 2.0 transformative projects is to change the trajectory of neuroscience research by providing tools and resources that everyone can use, regardless of their problem, their system, to study neural circuits across the brain, and very importantly, to do so at depth and at scale. So the 3 projects, and they're highly complementary, are the Brain Cell Atlas, which is shifting the emphasis from model species, mouse, toward creating a comprehensive part list of human and non-human brains. Together, so that's a part list. The second project is the whole mammalian brain connectivity project, which is to develop the tools necessary to generate a wiring diagram of mammalian brains. So we have these 86 billion neurons in our brains with these other non-neuronal cells. We need to understand how they connect with each other that actually forms these neural circuits. And then finally, we need tools for gaining precision cell access to these brain cell types that will allow us to both monitor, interrogate, and modulate these molecularly defined cell types and circuits. And together, these 3 projects, we expect to lay the foundation for future molecular and gene therapies for various neurologic and neuropsychiatric diseases. So this is really where the future is going to be. I strongly believe in every part of my body that with this information, neuroscience researchers will be able to make the discoveries at a much more rapid and a much more deeper clip. So these were the 3 takeaways I'm hoping to leave you with today. I know I'm running a bit over time. We're already seeing advances in the clinic from brain-funded projects. We're laying down a foundation to bring future cures to us closer. And we're also changing the way of doing science in the service of the above. And there's a 4th takeaway, and that is we are uniquely situated to pursue new and cross-cutting opportunities in technology and resource development that are not and would not otherwise be pursued by any one NIH institute or center. And we're not just adding incrementally to the many great advances being supported by NIH in the neuroscience space. but rather we're proving to be a strong force multiplier that is accelerating the pace of discovery that promises to bring much needed cures on a shorter timeline. So it's really critical for us to continue building this momentum, to push the field forward, and to make today's science fiction tomorrow's reality. And I'll stop here. I hope of a few minutes for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nye. That was inspirational. And I'm sure that people have many questions and thoughts, and I would encourage them to enter those into the chat. Meanwhile, maybe I will start off with a question. And not seeing anything in the chat as yet, I would ask, with all this opportunity for classification of cells in the brain and evaluating connections that we didn't know about otherwise, there's this great opportunity for precision medicine. I'm wondering how our thinking about inclusiveness and diversity actually plays into the work that you're doing. There are very diverse brains in different groups of people, and some of them are maybe a little bit different developmentally, genetically. How does the work that the Brain Initiative does play into the DEI?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. You're absolutely right. And in fact, every human is different. We're all different from each other in some way, in some subtle ways and some not so subtle ways. I think the experience we're seeing with this DBS therapies for depression is a great example. Just the absolute need to personalize, to tailor the therapy to the human you're actually trying to treat, you're attempting to treat. And that's because, for a couple of reasons, everybody's anatomy is a bit different. The developmental and life history is different, so their circuits are going to be set up in a somewhat different way. And in cases where there are pathologies, of course, that's going to throw in a different set of variables. So certainly that we can see that on the individual basis. Now, in these big projects that we've stood up, for example, the Human Brain Cell Atlasing Project, we've now just started these projects with an investment of about $100 million a year. And one of the key aspects that we demanded of our funded groups, and these are terrific groups and large consortia, is we have to have diversity in the sample pool. We demanded that there be ancestral diversity, as well as different samples from different points along the lifespan. So if we really are to understand how the human, any part of the human biology works, we have to take into account the variability, the diversity of humans on the planet. And the variability, actually, it's a feature, it's not a bug, right? Human disease mechanisms are going to be common. How they play out phenotypically is going to be subject to these other drivers of variability. And I think that's where the magic, that's where the gold is. That's where we're really going to learn about how organisms normally develop, how they function, and how diseases manifest. So we're really looking forward to really tapping in to the diversity of humans that we hope to study and hope to therefore provide resources for in terms of treatments down the line.
Thank you, Dr. Nye. I know that Dr. Reznik has a question, but so does Susan Raymond. I'll start with her and then get to you, Mark. Susan's chat is disabled. She is at MTech, and they work on technology development for health issues in the military. And these intersect with civilian concerns. Examples would be trauma, stress, I guess PTSD. And the question is, do you have any involvement in that work?
So yes and no, right? We're not jointly funding projects with the military. And here, there's been a lot of very active involvement in the Brain Initiative from DARPA. But that we do have mutual interests, for example, in conditions like PTSD and other behavioral disorders. DARPA has quite a few very exciting projects in the neuroscience space. And they by their nature take very much larger risks. The studies that I told you about very briefly about using deep brain stimulation to treat mental health disorders the origins of that project can actually be traced back to a DARPA project that started in 2014. Right, and it was when it was proposed. DARPA is very bold. It was proposed. They were interested in dealing with or helping warriors that came back from the theaters abroad with conditions like PTSD. They were looking for ways to help them. So in this case, we certainly have a mutual interest. There are, and again, they can out projects at different points along the risk spectrum. And that project went on for a while, and they continue now. And now we're starting to see them through NIH-funded projects that are being distributed more widely in the clinic. There are other possible uses of some of these technologies that kind of start veer into dual use, like enhancements, and that's something that we ourselves are not focusing on, but there are probably common interests there. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Dr. Nye. Now we'll move to Dr. Reznick. Mark?
Hi, thanks, John. That was a lovely presentation.
Thank you.
I should mention that one of the founders of deep brain stimulation for depression was Helen Mayberg, a former
Yes.
board member. Okay, so, but in fact, my question relates to that as well. So you talked about the heterogeneity in your initial presentation, and you touched on this, but I'm still a little confused. So we have the heterogeneity for the deep brain stimulation, yet we have a homogeneity for the atlas. Is that gonna happen, or is this going to be a fuzzy atlas?
No, sorry to confuse. So the atlas will be based on a limited set of reference brains, but there will be deep dives across a large number of brains. So what we want to do is we want to understand what are the common features across individuals and what's variable. And the variation is going to come about for a whole host of reasons, but part of it will probably be ancestral, right? But much of it's going to be the life experience of that individual, where they are in their lifespan, their life history, the environment in which they grew up, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a combination of both. And again, what we need to understand is what's common, what's different. As I'm sure you all can appreciate, some populations, some subpopulations are more or less vulnerable to certain diseases. Well, why is that? Right? I think we stand to learn a lot from the variability if we collect that information in an intentional and forward-thinking way, and are able to kind of connect that information down the line. So we have to recognize that there's no two humans on the planet are alike. Even if we did have the equivalent of an inbred mouse strain in humans, I don't think we would necessarily want to study it, because it's not going to be so useful, right? So it's going to be a complex endeavor. But one thing is for sure: what we've learned from whole genome genetic association studies is that if one makes predictions for disease susceptibility based on one population, for example, Europe, people from Northern Europe, those predictions are really great for that population, and they're actually pretty terrible for everybody else. So we're missing a lot. And we're not only missing the opportunity to help more people, but we're missing a lot of biology in there.
Wouldn't it be cool if identical twins were actually slightly different?
Well, I'm sure they're different in the epigenetically, right? And that's one of the things we're looking at as well is epigenetic factors, right?
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands right now, but I would ask this. We have an array of organizations that represent all dimensions of neuroscience and neurological disorders, and each of them probably has a particular angle or interest in the Brain Initiative. How can they get involved with the Brain Initiative? Probably one of the things you want to know is what organizations think, because ultimately the support for something like the Brain Initiative and the NIH comes from the public and many different communities in the public. So how can the organizations that we work with interact usefully and fruitfully with your group at the Brain Initiative?
Yeah, so I mean, ABC has already done a terrific job in helping us connect with people that are interested in what we do, and we very much appreciate that. So for those of you here, you're here because you're with ABC. So please, I encourage you. Sorry, Katie, to create more work, but that's one great point of contact. And come find us. braininitiative.nih.gov. Very easy to remember. Even I can remember it. Just go on the website. There's ways to find us. If not, Katie or anybody here at ABC can just connect you with me. We're always happy to talk to folks out there. We need to understand what the needs are, right? I mean, this is, we need to understand what the needs are, what the opportunities are based on those challenges. We're very, very much interested in hearing more from you. So please, we welcome your input. And there are also many other issues that I didn't have time to touch on, which include ethical issues about what we do. We touched on a little bit in terms of perhaps what the military is doing vis-a-vis what we're doing. And for these ethical issues, the issues regarding the ethical, legal, societal impacts of what we do, it's critical that we have an open dialogue with everybody, right? And you folks here represent many, many different quarters of the patient and research community, and we always welcome the opportunity to have an open and honest dialogue with you.
So speaking of intervening with our new understanding of the brain, the parts, the wiring diagram, how to integrate it and how to modulate, you gave a wonderful example of precision medicine and a patient with depression. But regarding the military and private citizens, many are injured, you know, in the field, on the road. They may have something like a spinal cord injury.
Yes.
And so one of the things that we need to sort of mediate is the connections that are disrupted. And it seems like the Brain Initiative may have a wonderful substrate for driving research related to recovery of motor function and say people who have had a spinal cord injury or a stroke or
Yes.
multiple
Yes.
sclerosis. And I'm sure a lot of organizations will be interested in moving better. So what's going on?
So what's going on in terms of what we're doing? I mean, a lot of some of the technology that we've been supporting is really aimed at after the fact, right? How can we help folks with these traumatic injuries, stroke, et cetera, live a better life? There's been some really amazing work done with language prostheses, neural prostheses that read out and convert recorded brain activity into either speech or text. But that doesn't give the person back their full life. How do we actually truly restore function? And again, this really comes back to brain's kind of unique perch of providing tools that will allow individual ICs really to pursue the search for these cures in a much more informed and we think more effective way. So we have a few projects that are, we have quite a few projects that are looking at neural circuit function, not only within the brain proper, but also in spinal circuits. We've, you know, it's the Brain Initiative, but we came to the realization that, you know, the brain's connected to other parts of the body, and given that the spinal cord is the CNS, I've had no compunction into really actively pushing ourselves out there. And of course, the function within the local spinal circuits is fascinating, and I think will be the key to helping patients regain recovery. And again, it's a site of possible intervention with different kinds of stimulation technologies, but also this is an area of great interest for regenerative medicine, which is a bit outside of brain's wheelhouse right now. But I would still argue that the more information that researchers have going in, the better studies they will design and the better information they will have coming out. And in fact, it's rare that I can pick up a journal, read a very, very exciting result, whether we fund it or not. There's a good chance that those folks relied on information that Brain Initiative investigators provided, if not the tool themselves. So we're really trying to lay down the foundation that will just accelerate all neuroscience research, really to be the force multiplier here.
thank you. I mean, this conciliant silo spanning approach is probably very exciting to many of our members. And I think probably to Dr. Kelly, because probably a number of the things you mentioned resonate with the work that he's doing in the FDA. And I know you presented a diagram where you showed all the different institutes you work with. There's so much more to talk about. Katie, I think we're kind of out of time right now. Is that right? So thank you so much, Dr. Nye. That is just so fascinating and inspiring, and we want to work with you and we want to help. It's obviously that the Brain Initiative is unique and special, that it's continuing to grow, that you have a great vision going forward with microconnectivity, tools for precision access, and a brand new brain cell atlas that can drive new research for treatments and cures. How wonderful. We want to help. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
fun.
It's always a pleasure being here. We really do appreciate the support. I'm looking forward to what our colleagues, our partners in the FDA are contributing as well. So thank you again. Always happy to take questions. And if you don't know how to find me, I'm sure Katie can help you out.
Thank you. And I think according to my map, it's very timely that we have Dr. Doug Kelly, who's going to be up next. Dr. Kelly is the Deputy Director of Science, Food, and the Drug Administration Centers for Devices and Radiologic Health. That's the FDA CDRH. And Dr. Reznik, I think, is going to mediate here.
So just very quickly, in September, the American Brain Coalition leadership met with the senior leadership of the FDA, including the commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf. And during the meeting, the FDA leadership expressed their support for engaging with the patient advocacy community, and agreed that this kind of engagement is really central to their function. And of course it is. And Dr. Jeff Shuren, who is the director of the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, called our attention to a pilot that was a program that was included in the user fee package, and that's called the Total Product Lifecycle Advisory Program. And the idea is that, as Dr. Kelly will explain, is to bring companies working on new concept together with patients, providers, and payers. And we're thrilled to have Dr. Doug Kelly with us today. He is, the title is wrong. He's the FDA, Deputy, let's see, what is it? The Deputy Director for Science of the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, or CDRH. I think I have that right, Doug. But anyway, you can correct me, and please, we're looking forward to listening to you and to have you take some questions as you finish.
Thank you very much. I apologize. My lawn guys decided this is the perfect time to blow leaves off my porch right in front of my office. So if it gets too noisy, somebody let me know. I'll go yell at them. Thank you so much. I am the Deputy Center Director for Science at FDA, Jeff Shuren's deputy. And just by way of background, I spent, after medical school, I decided I wanted to start a biotech company. So I went to business school at Stanford, got an MBA. And then instead of going back to medicine, I ended up becoming a partner with one of my professors who taught my venture capital class. He ran the oldest venture capital firm on the West Coast, Asset Management, and was the original investor in Amgen, Applied Biosystems, the first industrial gene sequencer, and Coherent Laser, the first industrial laser company. And then the list went on and on. And I guess he wanted somebody who was an MD and who could pronounce all the big words. And so I signed up for that job. And I stayed with the same group of guys for 30 years. My partners included Mike Hunkapiller, who invented the gene sequencer back at Lee Hood's lab at Caltech, Leighton Reed, who invented the gene chip with Steve Fodor at Harvard and started a company called Affymetrix, and a number of other people. So I was the dumb guy in the group, but they let me hang out anyway. And in the course of my career there, I spent most of my time investing in new companies, usually seed stage or early stage at least. And if we didn't find a company that we liked, I'd start one and I'd run it until I reached my level of competency in 6 weeks, whichever came first, and find somebody else to come run it. I had been a big critic of the FDA since almost everything I invested in was regulated by the FDA. And At some point in early 2020, Jeff Shuren asked me if I would consider coming and being his deputy in the device branch. At the time, as COVID was taking off, calendar year 2020, for a staff of 1,900 people at the FDA, we had 400,000 inbounds just on COVID. So it was clear that the old way of doing things was not going to work. When I came, one of the first things I worked on was the Medical Device User Fee Act and created a strategy for trying to improve the medtech ecosystem, see more products make it out into the hands of doctors and patients. That became the basis for this program called TAP, which I'm going to get into. And I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to blaze through a bunch of slides, so don't be intimidated by the number. Go. Can everybody see that? Great. There we go. So this is the typical consulting chevronogram that shows how ideas go all the way to patient access. It goes through the FDA, and then the problem is that FDA has been very focused on this part of the process and nothing here on the back end. And so what happens is that at least for the breakthrough program, over 95% of the breakthrough products that come through the FDA do not make it to commercial adoption. And it's a very high failure rate. And part of that is because the founders unfortunately view the FDA as the hard guys to get over. And so they decide instead, I'll do the cheapest and small study I can to get my FDA approval. But the problem is that you end up with payers and professional societies and patient advocacy groups that demand a higher level of evidence for their support. And when you find that out, when a lot of these founders find that out, it turns out that they can't raise money because the investors say that they haven't really reduced any risk, and so they're not really willing to pay very much for it. And that often results in a fire sale to a big incumbent like a Medtronic. That founder doesn't go back and raise more money because he had a failure. The investors who invested in that company will never do another medtech company. And so you see this hollowing out of the medtech ecosystem, which is unfortunate. And the issue is that we have a lot of stakeholders. It's the FDA, providers, payers, patients, hospital purchasing managers, a number of others I didn't say here, but the issue is that nobody owns this problem. And all these stakeholders tend to be pretty siloed. They have their reasons for wanting what the evidence they want. They're all legitimate, but nobody talks to one another. So when I came to the FDA, I decided this was the big problem that we needed to solve. So MedTech has known about this for a long time. AdvaMed, the big industrial advocacy group, pointed this out. They call it the Valley of Death. They've known about it, but nobody's doing anything about it. And if you look at how the numbers of money, the amounts of money they're invested, you can see here that MedTech has been pretty flat for a long time. And biotech, it's gone crazy. It used to be in the San Francisco Bay Area and Boston, you couldn't shake a tree without having a CEO of $1 trillion company fall out of it. That does not exist in the medtech world. And there's some structural reasons why that's the case. So we decided to address it with something we call the Total Product Lifecycle Advisory Program. The total product life cycles from product ideation all the way through to commercialization and ultimately many iterations and then obsolescence. And the idea is twofold. We divide the problem up into two parts. One is to bring all these people together and for companies to make their case at the very early stages when their burn rate is really low and they can make big strategic shifts for without much cost. And to ask patients, are these the endpoints that you're interested in? Is this the structure of the trial that you could participate in? To ask the providers and the professional societies, what do you need to be incorporated in the practice guidelines? And what evidence do I need to get you to get my CPT 3 code? And then lastly, for payers, what evidence do you need? And how can I structure my study so I can get you what you need? If you need a durability study, it means that I have to, before I start my study, I have to go and get it approved to have a rollover where I can consent patients appropriately so I don't have to chase them down after I finish my initial clinical study. Instead, maybe I could just roll them over into a 1, 2, 3 year, 4, 5 year study, whatever the payers are interested in. And then the second part of TAP is to make sure that we have essentially internal consultants who are like Sherpas. They understand the FDA and FDA process. 70% of the people that come to us at FDA is their first time. And so the goal of these people is to troubleshoot what they're experiencing, but also to get rapid, low formality dialogue, much more business-like dialogue than has existed in the past with the FDA, which has been, as of recently, very formal, very stiff, and it just takes too long. So again, this is another way of looking at the problem. We bring everybody together at the beginning, hopefully so we can get around the problems that you saw earlier, and you end up solving or actually having us execute our public health mandate, which is timely patient access to safe and effective medical devices. We can approve stuff all day long, but if patients don't get access to it, we're wasting our time. So again, here's another way of looking at it. Then instead of doing a study and then having to rework it and get people to, to beg, plead, and for people to take whatever data that we've managed to generate, instead of, we could do a single study or a smaller number of studies that get things done, and you can figure that out up front. That's probably a much more sustainable way to run a business. This talks about the communication that we typically have with people now with something called the pre-sub program, where you're allowed to ask questions about one subject. It's typically very long, months-long time before you can ask a second one. And this is just not a normal way of communicating as humans. The way that humans typically communicate is like this. It's like when you're asking your spouse where you want to go on vacation. It doesn't happen, in one meeting with lawyers in the room. It happens over a number of conversations, informal conversations over a long period of time. So you figure out your spouse likes the mountains, they hate the beach, they want an active vacation, whatever it is that they want. You figure that out over time, and you get to a meeting of the minds, and that's where we're trying to get to with FDA communication. And that is the gist of the program. I'm gonna stop sharing here. And why is it relevant to the American Brain Coalition? Well, the first therapeutic area we're going to start on is cardiovascular, but the next most likely one is in neuroscience. So it's something that would be of interest to your members. The people that are eligible for it are companies that have a breakthrough product, and they haven't had any substantial meetings with the FDA yet. And that way we can bring together all the stakeholders, and especially as we talked about earlier, patient advocacy groups to talk about what's really important to them. And that's the gist of the program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelly. And as we're waiting for some questions to come in, I thought maybe I would start.
Sure.
So in the presentation, you described a very interesting and interactive and potentially transformative system of going through not only approval, but making a product palatable and acceptable. The question I have is, right now, this is limited only to devices and diagnostics.
Yes.
So is there a plan to be, because those of us interested in therapies for brain disease, yeah, absolutely devices and diagnostics are going to be relevant, but so are drugs, so are biologics, so are perhaps even nutraceuticals. And how do we move towards a way to generate a seamless garment? Would that be through this program?
Ultimately, yes. In my initial discussions at the commissioner's office when I first proposed this, Janet Woodcock had told me that if this worked for the device branch, that they'd consider rolling it out across the entire FDA. But make no mistake, this is a fundamental change in the way that the FDA does business. This is it's a complete change in the mindset of reviewers and review staff in the FDA. It's a way of communicating. It's much faster than the way we've done it before. We will end up being fast enough that companies will not be able to keep up with us, which is kind of where we want to be. We want to be at the point where we're pushing the system that hard just to see, what is the maximum that we need. But it causes us to rethink everything that we do in the FDA, our workflow, how we measure it, how we audit it for industry. So the industry pays half of our budget. Want to make sure that they know that they're getting value for it. And again, it starts with breakthrough products, but we really set this up as to be kind of a prototype shop for CDRH, for the device and diagnostics branch. It's really important for companies that are doing things like I know Amit Etkin's work at the Etkin lab at Stanford and his work in circuitry, brain circuitry. And I think there's probably nothing more exciting. So having an FDA that's prepared to meet that work where they are and helping them gather the information they don't have, and maybe with the connections that they don't have that we can get at FDA. The FDA is the first institution that people come to that says, okay, you say you can do all this stuff, well, prove it. And they typically come early in their product development. So again, while their burn rate is low, it's really hard to change strategy when you're burning $3 million a month. It's really easy to do when you're burning $100,000. And so if you're going to have impact on a company in terms of just what do you think about as the CEO, you can't just outsource your knowledge of payers, and you can't outsource your regulatory stuff. Regulatory risk is really business risk. It's how much do we want to know about our patients? How much do we want to know about our device? How big is this market? What are our patients willing to accept? You know, what's their level of risk they're willing to tolerate? How much evidence do we need to generate? These are all really fundamental business questions that determines how much money you're going to have to raise, you know, how well capitalized your company is going to be, and how sustainable your company is going to be at the end of the day. And do you make your stakeholders, you take them from being orange traffic cones in your way and turn them into advocates, not just advocates, but evangelists for getting what you want out. And if they're not being evangelists, it makes you think, maybe I should really rethink about what I'm doing. Maybe I'm not, maybe the dogs aren't going to eat the dog food and I should focus on something else.
May I ask a question, Mark? Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. I don't know if you saw my hand, Mark, but
Katie informed me. Your hand is very tiny.
This is, well, you know.
We're not going there. Don't worry about it.
I wonder, thanks so much, Dr. Kelly. It sounds like you have a good business acumen, and you probably used to thinking of failing fast the way folks do in business, and you think in a systems kind of way rather than a sort of linear way with bottlenecks that delay things with a.
Well, I am a systems biologist.
Yeah, right. So from cells to systems to souls, you know, all the way from the smallest to the largest, that we have to do this.
You just went on mute. Matt, you just went on
I'm
mute.
wondering, yeah, no, this sort of conciliant thinking, I'm wondering how actually you implement the processes that you showed. You showed a sort of flow diagram with loops and reassessment and feedback for course corrections. And how do you actually implement that at the FDA? We have been advocating for something like an oncology center of excellence, recognizing that, you know, there are a lot, you know, there need to be resources to support something like that, but recognizing that might not be the best model. It seems like you're presenting a best model for getting things done efficiently and in a timely way. How exactly do you do that? What are the logistics? Are you using agile processes? Are you adopting techniques from industry to help operate within the federal government? How do you do it? And do you have any sort of recipe?
Yeah, well, I've run a lot of startups. I've invested in a lot of startups. I've sat on a lot of boards of startups, so I kind of understand how they're organized, and I understand how you have to live with a certain degree of uncertainty and a knowledge that you're going to fail at some number of things that you do. That's just baked into the process. And so how we're planning on doing it is a kind of a diversity of approaches early on until we winnow out which ones are working, which ones aren't. That is a really different way of thinking for the FDA. Just professionally, folks inside the FDA are not used to saying failure is going to be tolerated. So to say that let's try a bunch of things, we know some of them won't work out, and I'm not going to ding you for doing something that's not working. But one thing I will tell you is that it will be better than what exists now. So instead, let's try a bunch of things and see what works and what doesn't. So we realized in the beginning, it's going to be, as we say in the startup world, a lot of duct tape and baling wire. That it's not going to be pretty in the beginning, and that's okay. And as you move forward, you learn how to programmatize those things that are really working and make it so they're sustainable over the long term. in the beginning, a lot of these things typically end up being kind of very personality based. It's based on what that one person knows who's working in this case in the TAP program, and what their background is. But at some point you start locking these things down, and then you learn to experiment with the other things. So it's going to be kind of loosey-goosey in the beginning. At the same time, I just presented to the AdvaMed board of directors, which is the big industry trade group. And all these guys on the board all know how this works. They've all run companies from smaller companies to big companies. So they understand that that's how it's put together. What they need to know is that the people involved are going to be answerable and responsible with what they're doing, and that there'll be a degree of transparency, because ultimately I'm going to ask them for a lot of transparency. So we have to go first, and I'm happy to be completely transparent in what we're doing, tell you what's working and what's not, and solicit advice. In the case of patient advocacy, one of the things that we're working with is Michelle Tarver's group at FDA inside CDRH in an office called OST, the Office of Science and Technology. It's really the office that does a lot of partnerships and what have you. She is an ophthalmologist by training, but also has a PhD from Johns Hopkins in essentially patient econometrics, and has done a lot of patient choice studies. And what we want to do is be able to apply some of that learning to this TAP program, so patient advocacy can be optimized in a way that gets patient advocates what they are looking for, but also engages them in a way that they haven't been engaged before. I think it's really, really important. And a lot of patient advocacy groups are not set up to do that. And frankly, the FDA has not been set up with the toeholds that they need to figure out how do they get engaged. So that's one of the big things we're going to work on as well. And it's the same with the payers and the hospital purchasing managers and professional societies. A lot of these folks have wanted to work with the FDA, they just haven't really known how. And so part of what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them a toehold and say, what are your ideas? And we'll try them out. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else until we get something that does work.
How can we help you with that? We have this sort of marketplace of ideas coming from, so many different patient advocacy organizations who have boots on the ground and can give reality checks and input into new drugs, needs, drug development, aftermarket effects. How can we help with that?
Well, like I said, the woman at FDA who's really our patient sciences point person is Michelle Tarver. Her email address is michelle.tarver, Tarver, at fda.hhs.gov. That's the standard formula for FDA addresses, their email addresses. And
Thanks,
she is really the point person on the patient access stuff.
But I think it's important to mention, Doug, that ABC, while it exists as an umbrella patient advocacy group, also has the neuroscientists and the clinicians that take care of brain disease. And that, so as a result, we would really be more than simply, we would represent the patient, but represent the patient from the standpoint of those who are trying to do the research and the treatment as well.
Mm-hmm.
So is there another avenue then that ABC might be involved, or another?
Well, so here's the limitation of what we're looking to do. It's a voluntary program by the companies. So, and they're really, in a sense, driving the boat. So we give them a menu of things that they can choose from, and then they choose it. And if they already know professional societies, that's fine. If you want to do an additional program or additional forum that would be helpful to companies in specific areas, for example, if you had researchers that were doing work in particular areas and companies were interested in getting involved in those things because it helps them develop their, in our case, medical device or diagnostic, then we'd be happy to set that up. But that's kind of the limitation of this is nothing that we can force on these companies. It really has to come from them. So it has to be an offering to them that they see adds value ultimately in getting their product approved and commercialized.
And then I have a question that came in on the Q&A. And I'm going to try and paraphrase it. Basically, we all agree that all of us benefit from diversity. And this question is specifically about diversity in clinical trials. And one of the sub aims of it is, should the FDA in combination with the ABC develop a policy statement on diversity in clinical trials? And secondly, do you think, and I think this is more general, but that it would be appropriate to have a Congressional Neuroscience Caucus program with the workforce diversity head from the NIH and someone who's involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion from one of the patient advocacy groups whom we represent?
Well, let me put it this way. On the policy side, I can't say what you guys should do. But no, I mean, just it's not that it's inappropriate for me. It's be stupid for me because you have your mission and you have your policies that you need to make that happen. And that's nothing that FDA can say yay or nay on that would make a difference. I will tell you that part of what we're trying to get to is that I think that 90 or 95% of the time, FDA, industry, patient advocates, insurance companies, and everybody else, all the stakeholders are largely aligned. The problem is they all speak different languages and they don't really make it easy for one to understand the other. So for example, for health equity, everybody understands that health equity is an important strategic initiative, both for the FDA and for a lot of payers, for example. And companies that are getting started and are looking for payers ultimately to pay for what they're doing need to understand that having a clinical study that reflects the populations that are their customers and not just a bunch of little white guys probably makes a lot of sense. So the idea that you could somehow get payers to tell people and deliver that message for you, that's a very powerful way. That's a pocketbook way, a dollars and cents way of saying this is important. The company may start out with a particular prejudice, and that prejudice is often driven by lack of resources or lack of funding, that they want to have the simplest study that they can possibly do with the most homogeneous patient population to get a signal for the least amount of money. Whereas payers are interested in a much broader, CMS in particular, but also commercial payers are interested in a much broader patient population that really reflects their membership. So at the end of the day, why is a company going to do this? Well, they're going to do it because getting payers to pay for your stuff earlier makes your company more successful. And also understanding that ultimately that is a risk factor in your commercialization, and knowing that and being able to communicate that to your investors, that is also a really important thing, because part of the problem now is company founders understand very little of the system risk, of the stakeholder risk that they have to wade into when they're commercializing their product. And so as a result, without knowing what that risk is, they tend to have this cycle of failure and rework and failure and rework and raise more money and dilute equity dilution and what have you. It makes much more sense for those people, those founders, to talk to everybody, to talk to your group, to talk to payers and find out, what do you really want? And if you can communicate that to your investors, and even if it's a lot of money, knowing that up front and not having to make a mid-course change makes you a better CEO. It makes it that you have to raise less capital at the end of the day, less rework, and makes you a more sustainable enterprise. So there's a dollar and cents reason why people should look for solutions for the health equity problems. It's because everybody wants it, and they won't give you money if you don't do anything about it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kelly, for informing us about what it sounds like an exciting new program to help to bring cures to the patients we represent. And I hope this represents the beginning of a long and beautiful friendship between the ABC and the FDA. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Humphrey Bogart. I hope that happens too. And let me just say to John, who presented before, I mean, I think that the brain initiative is just profoundly exciting and some of the most important work in science right now. So thank you, John, for your presentation. It's very tremendously exciting.
Oh, thanks very much. And the slide I had to leave out was calling out our very highly valued federal partners, one of which, of course, is the FDA. And we are working on ways to work more seamlessly so we can get some of these new devices, new therapies into patients safely, of course, but on a more expeditious timeline.
And John, if I can help in any way, my email address is douglas.kelly.md@fda.hhs.gov.
Got it. We know how to find each other. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Kelly and Dr. Nye. Really appreciate that those were very interesting and informative. So I know I'll try to get us back on track and to talk about the future as well. So let me just quickly sort of go over our plan for next steps for possible engagement. As most of you know, and if you've been following ABC's initiatives, over the past 2 years, ABC has been advocating with both Congress and the FDA to make efforts to address the unmet need for treatments and cures for brain conditions, with particular emphasis on improving patient engagement in the FDA process. Due to time constraints, following this meeting, I'll be circulating a written report outlining our efforts to date, along with some policy proposals that seek to advance innovation and deliver safe and effective treatments to the millions of patients impacted by diseases and conditions of the brain. One of these policy proposals will include the TAP program and what we can do there. So I think it was really helpful to hear from Dr. Kelly. And what I'll do when I send around my written report, I will also include the recording from this meeting so folks that weren't able to listen could hear that as well. So along with this report, we'll also be asking for you to fill out a brief survey helping us plan our path forward. We know that surveys are sometimes not that fun, but in this case, I think it'll be really helpful and valuable to get our members' inputs, and it will help us implement our advocacy plan that will be reflective of the membership as a whole. And then we can really do a better advocacy on behalf of all of the ABC. So look for that to come. And I am going to now move it to our sort of planning for the future discussion as well. So thank you.
I think we're on to Steve, aren't we?
Yep. So no, a good survey, Katie, can be the high point of an administrator's day. Trust me. So don't ever discount it. All right, good. So hi, I'm Steve Strakowski. I am a professor of psychiatry at Indiana University and also at the University of Texas at Austin, where I divide my time, which is confusing and beyond the scope of this conversation. But I'm also a board member, and I'm working with of ABC and helping us develop our strategic plan for the next 5 years. So this conversation today was extremely timely because at the point we are in our planning, the input from today will absolutely be incorporated and be part of how we think of setting our goals and moving forward. So Katie, go ahead and put up the slide. So we're through, we formed a working strategic planning team. We've gotten quite a bit of input from our board and from other people and members of ABC. And we've developed a list of strengths and weaknesses, which you can see here, that we then are using to build from. As with any strategic plan, our goal is to capitalize on strengths, offset weaknesses, and then just be prepared for both opportunities and threats. Go ahead, Katie. This is the planning group. We have a nice diverse group with a lot of different types of experience. And so I think everyone has been a very good and active participant, and it's led to good conversations. I think clarifications with our own group of how we think about things. And then this group has also been representative of the larger board who we've taken things back to for further conversation. So one of the first things we've really been working on, along with the SWOT and looking at, getting that set up and thinking about what we're good at, was being a little clearer on what ABC's vision is. And you can see the current vision and mission now, and then being a little bit clearer on what our mission is, that is what we actually do. We find sometimes as people think about and talk about us that they're not always clear what we stand for. And so we think this work makes that better. And so our new vision is that we will improve the lives of all people affected by brain diseases and conditions. And the all people, we truly mean everyone, including family members and across all socioeconomic and ethnic and racial groups. And that's equity we were talking about earlier today here. inequitable care is bad care. It's just that simple. And so a big part of the quality measure of any institution, including ours, any organization, is that we are achieving equity. That we then wanted to be clear on what it is we do. And so we try to advance the understanding of how the brain works in order to reduce the burden and stigma of brain diseases and conditions, in order to improve lives of affected people. And again, people both with these conditions and diseases and their families. And we do it by three things. We convene, we lead, and we engage. Our convening function is important to bring the right people to the table in order to set a platform for advocacy and solutions and innovating. We then, once we're convened, we want to lead collaboration through the members by adding diverse groups, developing engagement outreach strategies, and really capitalizing on the expertise we've now collected and produce strategies and processes and policies to achieve our mission and vision. And then finally, we are engaging the public. We spend a lot of work with the public and its representatives and stakeholders to improve awareness about brain disease, defeat stigma, which continues to be unfortunately all too common for people suffering with brain diseases, advocate publicly and develop public advocacy platforms, and then advance research. As Mark Resnick said earlier, many of us on this board are both clinicians and researchers. And so that's a part of what we can bring directly that not all organizations can, and where we do think we could work with the FDA, Doug, to be a good partner. And so with this new vision and mission, we think we're clearer on what we're doing, and in the process of our planning, the next step now is we're going to develop our 5-year goals each of them based within our three mission areas. And so this is the planning process. We're really up to step 7. We started working on this, I think, this summer, but time is not one of my strengths, so I can't remember for sure. We've done everything I've talked about so far, and we're now goal setting, and we will get these goals out as they're developed. They'll be vetted with key groups to make sure they're consistent with what everyone thinks we ought to be doing. And we think it sets an exciting course for ABC's next 5 years to build on what's been a successful organization, to continue to grow and advance our vision for a world where people with brain diseases are seeing those disease impacts going away as rapidly as possible over time. So I think that's our last slide, right, Katie? Yep, so any questions from anyone?
Good mission, good vision.
Thanks, Matt. We're excited. I'm glad to see so many people involved. That's one of our goals that we're working on. And so please feel free to drop Katie a line at any time if you think of something to help us think about what do we need to accomplish in the next 5 years to keep building on the success that we've already engendered. So good. So thank you all.
Patrick,
Yep.
you're on.
Yep, I think it's my turn. So welcome, everyone. My name is Patrick McCartney. I am the Executive Director of the International Essential Tremor Foundation, also an ABC board member, and serve as the chair of the Programming, Engagement, and Outreach Committee. And our committee has established an ABC podcast series that's going to feature ABC members. It's going to be called Voices for the Brain. It's going to debut in January of 2023. So we'd like to invite every ABC member to be featured in this podcast to showcase your initiatives in the brain space, how you work with ABC on your advocacy efforts. If you haven't already signed up to be interviewed, please contact Katie or Sheila in the ABC office, and they will get you signed up and record your podcast to be released at a future date. That was quick and short, Matt.
Yes, it is. I wonder if anybody has any questions, comments. Does anyone want to raise their hands? Katie, is there anything you want to say before I wrap up?
Thanks.
Oh, Go ahead.
Appreciate everybody's support, and of course, us with any concerns that you have for the ABC. We have an exciting year ahead of us, and we will be circulating more information, like I said, some surveys that we want you to conduct. And then also our annual report will be coming out later this year as well. So take a look at that, and people might have questions or comments from that as well.
Thanks, Katie. If there are any discussions or comments, we're glad to speak with you offline, but thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Dr. Nye and Dr. Kelly, for your really inspirational and thoughtful talks. To the members, I think we're really privileged and grateful to have all of you represented. We value all of your memberships, and we're really excited for the future, kind of along the lines of what Steve mentioned as we sort of move forward in our next phase, our next 5 years for the ABC. Couldn't do what we do without you. So again, please feel free to reach out to me or Katie or any of the board members with ideas, initiative, or concerns. So hope to see you all soon, maybe even in person. Maybe some of you will be showing up to the Society for Neuroscience or other meetings. We'd love to see you if you're there. So thank you and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Be well, everybody.